Welcome to the Future of Resolution, Miles Mediation and Arbitration's podcast. In this episode, Miles neutral Winter Wheeler has a conversation with Paula Frederick, who is the General Counsel for the State Bar of Georgia and the Chair for the ABA Standing Committee on Ethics and Professional Responsibility. Paula and Winter discuss ongoing challenges in the legal industry and Paula's role as a GC.
Thank you for listening in today. I am Winter Wheeler, a full-time mediator and arbitrator at Miles Mediation and Arbitration. And on this episode of the Future of Resolution podcast, my guest is Paula Frederick. She is General Counsel for the State Bar of Georgia. Paula, I am so glad you agreed to speak with me today. Thank you so much.
I'm happy to be here.
I am so excited because you've always been an inspirational figure to me, and I think to a lot of people in our community. But before we really dive into that, could you, give us a little bit of information about your background and whatever you think is important that happened in your life that kind of got you to the position you hold today?
Okay. How much time do we have? Because I could talk about that endlessly. It's a mystery how I got here. I never would have thought that this would be the job that I would end up doing. And I came out of law school at a time when we thought the recession was bad. It was nothing like it is now. Wanting to be a legal services lawyer. And at the time, Ronald Reagan was in office and his mission was to dismantle the Legal Services Corporation and to defund the offices, the type of office where I wanted to work. But I was lucky enough to get a job with the Atlanta Legal Aid Society and would have thought that I would be there forever. 6 years in, I think I was a little bit frustrated with the restrictions on what we were able to do. It's a great place to work. I love the Atlanta Legal Aid Society, but there was no room for advancement there. And so I was managing attorney of the downtown Atlanta office and really, I wasn't going to become the director of Atlanta Legal Aid. So kind of got in that rut where I was a little bit burnt out and looking for something else to do. And heard about the job here at the bar by happenstance. That there was a job in the disciplinary office. It was not something I frankly had even ever thought about or heard of. I guess I knew that bad lawyers got disbarred or whatever, but I had never really thought about how that happened or where the people who worked, who did that work were or anything. So I sort of came over and had an interview that was a very, in hindsight, kind of, I think my attitude was a little bit flippant about it, that I really wasn't looking for that kind of job, didn't know that it was something that I would like, but was offered the job based on the litigation experience that I had, because I'd been in court a couple of times a week with legal aid. And just sort of decided, okay, I'll give it a try, and figured if I didn't like it, I'd find something else to do. So I started as a disciplinary prosecutor here and really ended up, I don't think I'm a prosecutor in the criminal context, but there's something about prosecuting lawyers, frankly, that I don't know if it sounds right to say that it appeals to me. But it appeals to me. It's, for me, comparable to the consumer law that I was doing in Atlanta Legal Aid. It's not like you're going to send somebody to prison or ruin their life. You're really trying to make sure that clients of lawyers get what they deserve in terms of the representation that they either have paid for or haven't paid for. But when they hire a lawyer, that they get the right kind of representation. So I was here, I was doing the work. I liked the work. I'd been very involved with the Atlanta bar, but never with the State Bar of Georgia, and found that it's a real collegial, congenial group of people. And I kind of enjoyed that piece of it as much as anything, that you're constantly with groups of lawyers in sort of convention meeting type settings. You get to meet people from around the state. I like that part of the job. And so when my predecessor as general counsel was retiring, he recommended that I replace him as general counsel. Yet another thing that I never would have said I wanted to do, because the parts of the job now that differ from when I was a prosecutor really are the admin parts of it, the administrative responsibilities and then the bar council work itself is very different from what I was accustomed to. So I've had to learn employment and insurance and a little bit of tax and, contracts, just all this stuff that I never had to deal with as either a legal aid lawyer or a disciplinary prosecutor. But that's good for you to have to learn something new every now and then. And so that has sort of turned into a job that I like, that I hope I'm good at, but that is different enough every day that it presents ongoing challenges, and I don't get bored with it, God knows. So that's that.
That was a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a lot.
So, when you're talking about your current position and your role as general counsel, like on a daily basis, though, like what is it that you oversee? I know you're talking about like having to learn all these different areas of the law in general, but how many people are you overseeing? Like, how do you have your department split up? Like, what exactly goes on every day?
Well, the bar itself is split into an administrative side and then the office of the general counsel. And I frankly don't know how many people I supervise, probably 25 or 30 people. There are 11 lawyers and some investigators, paralegals, support staff, that kind of thing. And the difference, there's some lawyers who only handle disciplinary cases. So I've got a deputy general counsel who's in charge of the disciplinary process, and she, on a daily basis, supervises the 6 lawyers who investigate and prosecute disciplinary cases. Then there are 2 other lawyers who don't do any disciplinary work, but they serve as bar counsel. It's basically in-house counsel to the organization itself. And that's the other piece of the job where I wasn't necessarily as familiar with the work as I probably should have been to become the general counsel. But that's where things like, we're going to have a meeting. The annual meeting was supposed to be in Destin in a couple of weeks. And so there are contracts related to that. And now there's undoing the contracts related to that because of the pandemic. We represent ICLE, the Institute for Continuing Legal Education, which is an enormous operation in and of itself with similar sorts of things, contracts. And then just the admin side of the bar has 70 some odd employees. So there's over 100 employees for the bar at large. And related to that, of course, you've got employment matters, the occasional harassment kind of complaint that has to be investigated, the operation of the bar itself really is just like any other in-house counsel position in terms of giving advice to the leadership. I go to a lot of meetings, but I think my favorite part of it always will be the disciplinary piece where the disciplinary board investigates grievances that are filed against lawyers and refers some of them to my office for prosecution. We filed a case against a lawyer in the Supreme Court and sometimes have to have hearings, sometimes settle things for any lawyer who's found to have engaged in unethical conduct. So there are 2 very different pieces of a job. And in lots of jurisdictions, 2 different people would do the 2 jobs. Georgia's one of a handful of states that has the bar counsel, in-house counsel role and the disciplinary role as part of the same office.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I had no idea you did all of those things. I know that many people kind of think of you as, when they think of you, they think about ethical questions and bar grievances.
Right. Don't tell me I'm in trouble. I get that all the time. I'll call somebody and they're scared to death because they think I'm calling to tell them they've been disbarred, as though that could happen without them knowing. But anyway.
Right. That's not the kind of phone call. That's not a cold call that you get, right? You're always so helpful. So, I don't even know if you remember this, but back in my prior career, I did a lot of legal malpractice defense work. And so I did have to interact a lot with the bar on behalf of my clients. And it was always just, and I don't want to sound flippant that it was a pleasant experience, but it wasn't a difficult experience,
Yeah. I think it shouldn't be. I mean, you shouldn't be scared to pick up the phone and call the bar and say, before I do this, what do I need to do? Or I did this, I don't think I was supposed to. Better that you call and try to figure it out than, it truly is, the cover up is worse than the crime. We see that daily in what I do. So for me, it's important to be approachable. Half the world has my cell phone number. And, somebody was complaining the other day, well, I was having a dispute with a lawyer and she was able to pick up the cell phone and get you on the phone. You all must be very close. It's like, no, everybody
has my number.
Okay, call. I'd rather have you call than have to figure out how to prosecute you later on.
Exactly. Before we started recording, I told you, that I think a lot of people are intimidated just based on your title and a lack of knowledge about you individually. But of course, a lack of understanding about all of the things that you do on behalf of lawyers. So to the extent that you're involved in helping lawyers with things like, substance abuse or mental health and things like that, I know that the bar has like a huge initiative going on right now, and there are lots and lots of programs. Like, where do you come in kind of in that arena?
Well, we do have a lot going on right now in a couple of different places. The bar president from last bar year, it'll probably be 2 years ago by the time anybody sees this video, but Ken Hodges, who's now a judge on the Court of Appeals, was very much into the wellness movement, I'll call it. And wellness as a matter of professional responsibility, I guess, is something that has just taken hold in the last few years around the country. And with the work that I do with the American Bar Association, I've seen a lot of it coming down the pike, and the changes in the way that lawyers think about their own health and their own mental health as a matter of being a good lawyer. And it's a good thing, because if you sit through a disciplinary board meeting where the lawyers who've handled investigations of grievances are reporting the results over and over and over again, the problem with the lawyer really stems from the lawyer being unhealthy, whether it's some sort of mental issue or, frankly, just as frequently, it's a physical problem. We realized out of one meeting, we got 3 lawyers with uncontrolled diabetes, and they'd ended up in the hospital unexpectedly, and they were solo or small firm practitioners, and there's nobody to handle the cases, and people start complaining, not knowing where the lawyer is. And it's a physical health issue that's caused the problem. So I very much see as part of my job in trying to be preventive with people about the problems that end up in my office, that one of the things that we should focus on is, lawyer wellness. So Ken started a wellness committee. That's a huge committee because there's so many aspects to lawyer wellness, and it's kind of hard to get your arms around. But I think it's good in a way that they try to do so much, because at times like these, with this pandemic and with the isolation that a lot of people are feeling, it's important to remind people that the bar has resources for, even you've got free consultations with the therapist if you want through the bar. And the lawyer assistance program is a separate committee from the wellness committee that has peer mentors who can talk to people about various kinds of problems that they might be experiencing. So my involvement with, there are a couple of committees within the wellness group and the lawyer assistance program where my staff people serve as counsel to the committee, to the extent that anybody wants to change a bar rule or create a new committee, we have to be involved just to get the procedural steps done, or to write the rule change. And we see it as a way, it's just like our ethics helpline, where if you call with an ethics question, we're going to tell you what we think you ought to do with the hope that you'll stay out of trouble. It's very much like that. Keep people out of trouble, make sure that they're healthy, make sure that they're dealing with any mental health issues that they have, depression, stress, whatever it is. If we can get you healthy, you're going to be a better lawyer.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I love that the bar has a has a goal to be preventative and to get in front of these things and to help lawyers before they get in trouble. And then, of course, also, if you do get in trouble, they still want to take care of you and help you out. So I love that. I don't know if every bar has that. The Florida bar, I'm a member of the Florida bar as well, and they're just now starting their wellness initiative. And they actually had to fast track it due to COVID-19.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, as I said, I think that the American bar and sort of nationally, there's been this real push to get task forces up and running, and really just to have lawyers acknowledge that this is something that the bar ought to care about. You're right. I mean, there used to be real stigma, I think, associated with what's now the wellness effort. So it's good.
Oh, I definitely think it's good. I think self-isolation and quarantine have really caused a lot of people to look inward, and that can either be really good or really bad. Being by yourself and having a lot of time to think can be difficult for a lot of people.
Right.
So, I'm wondering, have you seen a change in the types of questions that you're receiving from the membership? Like, have your ethics questions changed, or like the nature of them changed? Have they increased?
It's been an interesting time. I'll just say it like that to start with. And at the beginning, we were getting frantic calls from people whose work typically would require them to be in the same room with other people at a time when they were afraid to be in the same room with other people. And we were not really able to be particularly helpful with that because, if it's that you're in the middle of a trial and the judge is going to require you to come to court to finish the trial, I can't override a judge's decision to bring people into a courtroom. Although, in hindsight, there were a couple of situations where that really turned into, ground zero for spreading disease. But so we get those calls from panicked lawyers. Am I violating the rules of professional conduct by not being someplace physically that I'm supposed to be? We got a bunch of that at the beginning. Then we got more practical kinds of questions that aren't really ethical dilemmas, but lawyers who, for instance, wanted the bar to help with getting the governor to issue an executive order about remote notary. And for lawyers who do wills, there were more and more people who wanted wills and advance directives as the pandemic started to spread, and they started to worry about getting sick and not having made a will or not having a plan in place. And the statute regarding attestations requires sort of in-person attestation of wills. And so we were getting 5, 6, 7, 8 calls a day from people asking us to help get a change to the law or an exception to the law or something that would allow remote notarization. And we ended up, through our office, our legislative affairs person was able to actually get that done in a way that I think was very helpful and quite a relief to lawyers who do wills and estates, and also to closing attorneys, because the state sort of closed down mid-March towards the end of the month when closing lawyers are really, really busy. They were the ones calling saying, do I have to go do this closing in person? And, we'd always required that closings be done in person, but we figured out a way around it with this remote notary thing. So some of the things that I would call advocacy for lawyers have really just been trying to find a way to deal with a practical problem that a lawyer's experiencing because it's not business as usual. Our law practice management department has been very, very busy. There are a lot of us who didn't take seriously this whole need to keep abreast of technology. And, I am probably one of them. I mean, in hindsight, why doesn't everybody in my office have a laptop and a docking station at their desk so that when we decided that we were going to close on March 13, you pick up your computer, you go home, you plug it in at home and turn it on, and it's just like it is when it's at work. I mean, we weren't there. And we have always been a little bit averse to meetings by Zoom, frankly. I mean, meetings that aren't in person, because I mean, frankly, the nature of what we do as a disciplinary board, to me, is very much like jury deliberations. You need to be able to see each other and to interact, and I think the nature of the deliberation is very different in person and remotely. So just working through things like that, and frankly, adapting maybe when you realize you can't do everything the way that you've always done it. Working through that mentally has been kind of hopefully what we have helped lawyers to do. But as for types of complaints, it's the same stuff. And frankly, there's at least as much of it as there ever was from what I could tell. Lawyers, the biggest complaint that we have every year is communication, that clients don't know what's going on with their case, the lawyer won't return their phone calls, blah, 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 blah. And that still continues to be maybe even more so now. I think a lot of lawyers are still scrambling to try to figure out how to practice in this new environment. And sometimes, for us, for instance, we're still teleworking. We've got somebody coming in to open the mail just a couple of times a week. And so things are clearly moving slower than they normally do. And that upsets, people get upset about that. They need to know what's going on with their case. And so that is still what we hear from them more than anything else.
Okay. I mean, I guess that really makes sense. that was the typical claim that you would get. And so obviously, because of what's going on right now, it's obviously more difficult to get
even more so. Yeah. Yeah. And we've got a consumer assistance program that handles that first line. I mean, when somebody says that the lawyer won't return their phone call, we're not going to disbar them, but we're going to give them a phone call and say, look, call your client. They need to know what's going on with their case. And so we're doing more of that than ever.
Yeah. God bless you doing that work. I remember when I got the notification about, the virtual notarization, essentially. And I remember thinking, wow, they got that done really, really quickly.
Really quickly, yeah.
I was thoroughly impressed. Also then when you guys adopted virtual CLEs or online CLEs and kind of removed that in-person requirement, I thought that was fantastic, and it happened very quickly because our deadline was the end of March of this year. Get your hours in, and so typically lawyers are scrambling to get those last in-person hours in. It wasn't me this year, thankfully.
I used to send an email to all my friends and remind them about the deadline, and then that started scaring everybody, so I just stopped doing it. No, I think with all those things, we are fortunate in Georgia to have a very good relationship with the Supreme Court. And the bar is a creature of the Supreme Court. The court created the bar to help it perform its function of regulating lawyers. So that's the case in every jurisdiction, but many jurisdictions don't have the same kind of relationship with their court that we have. And so we are able to contact the Supreme Court when we see a need like that and just say, it's not an adversarial situation where there's another side who has to be heard from. We sort of feel like we're speaking on behalf of the 50-something thousand lawyers in Georgia and asking the court to consider making a change that would benefit our client. And they've been absolutely receptive to things like that throughout this whole process. They have surprised me as well in how quickly they'll act on some of these things. But they just extended the allowance for virtual CLE. You can only get something like half of your hours virtually in the past, and they've changed it and put a deadline on it, but they've extended the deadline so that next year's credits we can get that way as well.
Which is fantastic news, I know, for a lot of people, because I think going forward, in this, quote, new normal that we have, there are going to be so many people who just can't leave home or don't want to leave home, until there's a vaccine, potentially. And that brings up another question I had for you. You mentioned briefly earlier about, you were talking about how lawyers were calling you saying they were not comfortable going into the courthouse. they didn't want to go. Do I have to go?
Mm-hmm.
And so, that makes me wonder about jury trials. Do you have any opinion about that? Like, what do you think about the potential for in-person jury trials happening before we have the vaccine, and the potential for a virtual jury trial? I know you already said you're not a big fan.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of this virtual thing, but I mean, if we have no alternative, I think we're wrestling with that right now in my office, with the need to do something in a case as opposed to nothing. And if the old way of doing it isn't possible, you got to do something. And so I think that's where courthouses are. We've been talking to a number of court clerks and the folks responsible for reopening courthouses, and they've got the same concerns that we have in opening this big old bar center. I mean, are you going to let just anybody in? How are you going to enforce social distancing? How can you even physically accommodate a jury with social distancing in your typical courthouse? It would require something probably larger than most counties around the state even have. And so it's going to look different, which means that maybe it just has to change, and maybe it has to be done virtually. I haven't had to do any oral argument for a virtual oral argument, but I've watched a couple, and I think, it's fine. It ends up being fine. I guess for me, it's hard to think about, questioning witnesses and really trying to relate to a jury at the same time that you're doing, the job, questioning somebody or whatever, if all of these things have to happen virtually. I feel like the interaction is very different. So that bugs me, but that may be what we're stuck with.
Yeah. I generally feel the same. We were doing mediations virtually, and we'll continue to do them that way. But when I think about a jury trial, and, especially during voir dire, and you're trying to communicate with one person and really connect with them in the moment, but then you're also trying to take stock of everybody who's around you and how are they responding to it.
Definitely. How are they reacting? Uh-huh.
Right. And that's a lot harder to do when there's 20, 30 people on your screen.
It's impossible. I mean, I don't think it's possible. So, and it's just different because, this whole virtual thing, I can't even tell who somebody's looking at if there's more than one person on the screen. I mean, are they paying attention to me? Or are they gazing at themselves and wondering why they didn't comb their hair? You just never know.
Don't call me out, Paula.
You look like you're looking at me, but you're going, wait a minute. Yeah. So it's just hard. And that said, I realize, I've been at this 30 something years now, and it can't stay the same. I mean, I always compare it to pledging sorority. It's like, once you're in, you don't want anybody else to come in unless they do all the things that you had to do. So it's like the conversation about the bar exam right now, for instance. Is there going to be a virtual bar or an online bar or something like that? And I have such a visceral reaction to that. Like, oh, hell no. I had to sit for that exam 2 days. You have to do it too. And it's on some level just mean. But the other piece of it is it's completely impractical because it sounds like we might not be able to do that for another several months. So, the harsh reality is that things are changing whether I want them to or not, I guess.
Well, don't feel bad. I don't necessarily think that that's your visceral reaction is mean, and maybe that's because they have the same reaction. But I've taken 3 bar exams, and so
oh God.
I sat for all 3 of them. I'm like, you can do this, it's fine. But then at the same time, it's like, our profession, we have to have new, younger lawyers. That's how we regenerate, essentially.
Yeah.
Younger lawyers keep this profession going, frankly.
Yeah.
And so we can't put them in a position where they can't make a living. They went to law school.
Cannot.
Yeah.
Let me just warn you, there's a protest coming down the street outside my office, which you may be able to hear. And maybe I'll get some good film of something. But yeah, it looks like there is a justice for everybody kind of a protest going by the State Bar building right now.
Hey, okay.
So if you hear sirens, that's what it is.
You're not being rated.
Not me. That's what it is.
So, did you say when the bar building is opening? Is that it's like mid-June?
It's a work in progress. I'm spending a lot of time now on calls, trying to figure that out. And there are many, many problems, but our tentative plan is to open just for staff and employees of our tenants within the next, well, certainly by the beginning of July at the latest, I would think. And to do that with a staggered work day so that only half of the employees are here on any given day. We've got some employees who work in cubicles that are not 6 feet apart, probably by the time they're all sort of sitting where they sit in their cubes. So we're working out the spacing on that. We're rearranging the furniture in the lobby. We're putting shields around the security desk and, the whole temperature scan. It's not anything that I claim any expertise in, but we're having to figure it out. And I think a lot of people are in the same position. So, it's a work in progress, and we don't have anything firmed up yet because we're tracking the numbers every day and frankly, hoping to see a downward trend before we have to open our doors. And that hasn't happened yet.
Is there any, are you guys working directly with the Supreme Court about when you're comfortable to open to the public? Will that have anything to do with, perhaps when courthouses are completely open, or are those two things not related?
They're related, I think, but it's interesting because the Supreme Court has recently entered orders in our cases, the disciplinary cases that are pending at the court, that only need to be briefed. And, we rarely get invited up there to do oral argument. And so we had stays in all the cases. And in the last week or so, they lifted the stays saying, let's move these cases along. I think they are as concerned about backlog as anybody else.
Yeah.
But they recognize that their appellate review of a case is very different from what would happen in a county courthouse around the state, where you need to be there in person and have witnesses in and the public and all of this. And so they're being very, I think, deferential of how these other courthouses decide and when they decide that they want to reopen. So it's a little different, but frankly, we're talking to them and the clerks over there who are charged with figuring out what's going to happen. They've got that beautiful, huge new building. Yeah. And so, and it's got all kinds of, talk about space to social distance. So they're trying to figure out what they're going to do. But I think they realize that they're in a different position from everybody else.
Yeah, very true. I'm glad you brought that up. The building is amazing. And
I love the building.
It is gorgeous. And I was supposed to have a private tour. And I think
it's off.
It was like the first week of March, and then, something came up and the tour got canceled. I was like, we'll just go next week.
No, you won't.
No.
Same thing. I was arranging a tour for my whole staff. They were dying to get over there. And, I was there once for a meeting and sort of went into the courtroom where the meeting was, and then that was it. But the space is just palatial. And I think, like I said, they can social distance pretty easily over there if they're not letting the public come tour and stuff like that.
Right. So does the bar intend to provide any ongoing guidance on best practices going forward with respect to pandemics? I know this is such an odd time for us, but, since many anticipate that there will be flare-ups of COVID-19, and you're seeing, you're uniquely situated to know a lot of what lawyers are thinking, if not basically everything. Because I know people are calling you with every teeny little
problem. They do.
So
I don't know. I don't have all the answers. We're watching. I mean, I guess what we do have is access to a lot of information. Right. And I mean, while, like I said, I would not claim any expertise in any of this, a lot of it's just practical information. And so through national networks like the National Association of Bar Executives, for instance, the National Association of Bar Executives is the executive directors of all the bars around the country. And most of them own buildings and are in similar positions to Jeff Davis, our executive director. And so they've been having these roundtable conversations every week where they've discussed ideas about when to reopen, how to reopen, how to help lawyers reopen their offices. And so we're benefiting from all of that conversation. But the other thing is that a lot of them are doing guides for their members to help their members figure it out. And we have not done that yet, but sometimes what we do is just link to somebody else's stuff. I think this might be why remake the wheel. This might be a situation where the guide that they did in Illinois is so great, we just say, why don't you look at the Illinois guide? Here's a link. And but that's as far as it's gotten. I don't think we've had any conversation yet about the bar as an organization providing that kind of advice to lawyers to help them reopen their office.
Okay. Thank you. What do you think the practical ramifications, though, might be of what's going on right now? So as we record this, we are still, at least my office is still not open.
Right. Mine isn't either.
Yeah, we opened June 1st. Your office is still not open. The courthouses are not all open. So while we're kind of dealing with this and coming up with ways to do things virtually and online, do you think people are going to start to like these things when they get used to them? And if they do you think that we might end up doing more of it online? For example, with people being able to skip the in-person CLEs and do them online, if the membership says, we really like that option, can we do that into the future? Are these the types of things that you might be willing to consider, or have you been considering? Or are we kind of just still in that, let's figure out how to make this time period work phase?
No, I think it's a little bit of both. And I can tell you for that example, for instance, we've been having conversations for years, frankly, about the in-person CLE requirement and whether the time had come to relax it. When we decided to relax it for this bar year, there was still conversation about the value of in-person CLE, just almost forcing lawyers to interact and in ways, in ways that I think end up being beneficial. But, the conversation was, well, do they really? We think by saying you can only get half of your hours virtually, you have to go to an in-person CLE for your other hours, that means lawyers are talking to each other and getting to know each other and interacting and being collegial. And maybe all it means is that they walk into the seminar room and open the newspaper and never even talk to anyone else. So is it accomplishing, is there really any point to requiring what we require right now? So I do think that this time is likely to change things like that. But there's still this nostalgic, the way we used to do it was so much better back in the olden days, kind of a feeling about it. But no, I mean, for my personal example is that I have always resisted allowing people to work from home. And I never unfortunately, in an office like mine, there are particular jobs where people cannot telework. They have to be here to do the jobs. We still are not paperless. The members of the public who are complaining with us need to be able to send us stuff or to bring us stuff, and somebody needs to be here to get the mail, for instance. Even if they're then scanning it and working paperlessly from there. And so some of that's going to change in that I am now determined to make this process as paperless as it can be while still being responsive to the members of the public who don't have access to the internet or computers or whatever. So I think, yeah, this whole thing is going to force us to become more dependent on technology, more proficient with technology, and to use it better and more often. But I don't. A lot of that stuff we were looking at anyway didn't feel any sense of urgency about, and now it's urgent. So we'll see if it takes in the long run. I mean, I was just having the conversation about the staggered work week and who gets to stay home and do their job from there and who has to come into the office. And I still feel like that's going to create some resentments within the staff, but there's a reason for it now that there wasn't before that I think people understand.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think, talking to colleagues who were not allowed to work from home previously, who now have to, I think that there's a little bit of animosity going on.
It's human nature, yeah.
Yeah, like, see, I could have been doing my job from here.
Yeah. I told you.
I told you so. See, my productivity hasn't gone down, and now I'm better equipped to also help my family at the same time. So I think there's a lot of that's going to be happening.
No, it's happening.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think right now I'm just glad I don't work in a law firm. I don't really want to be a part of that conversation.
Yeah.
But as far as like the in-person CLE, like I get what you're saying. Me, we're both in Lawyers Club. You are our president. I'm just a social person. So I love going to the in-person CLEs.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you meet people who are interested in at least the topic of the program. You've got something in common. I like it too.
And I'm like, ooh, this is such an opportunity to meet new people. Like, who's sitting next to me? But at the same time, I don't think most people feel that way about it.
Maybe not. Apparently, we're the minority.
Yeah. Because, you definitely see people who are in there simply focused on what's being what's on the screen. They're not really interacting with the rest of us. And, it is what it is. They probably wouldn't care if they were doing it online anyway. So
exactly. Well, and then, the other theory is that if you're doing it online, you're really cheating and you're not paying attention. And there are ways that technology has fixed that now with these periodic, in the middle of the program, you've got to check in or answer a question or something like, we can control that.
Yeah, I mentioned before, I have 3 bar licenses. Thankfully, only 2 require me to do CLEs. But for Florida, I can do all of my CLEs online. And like you said, they all have that, there's like randomly like a little key or a keyword in the middle of it. And you have to supply that and, whatever. But I don't know. It's convenient, but I like the social aspect.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get some hate mail from people for that, but whatever. It's fine.
Yeah. People are different.
Yes, they're all different. So I think that the last thing that I want to ask you is about the programs available to lawyers. So we talked about how there are lots of programs available for struggling lawyers. Are there also financial assistance programs for lawyers or anything like that?
Not through the bar. We have a program called Solace right now that is support. I can't even remember what it stands for, but it's sort of it's a bar committee, but the purpose is just to provide support to lawyers for any sort of personal thing they might be going through. And it's modeled on a program that another state has, maybe South Carolina, where, a lawyer's house burned down. And some members of the bar came together and got them all the stuff that they would need for whatever the place was that they were moving into. And, things like that, where if someone's ill, people can come together and help out with cases and things like it. Just a variety of support systems through the bar. But because we are a mandatory bar, I think there would be no problem with a voluntary bar doing something like that. But we're a mandatory bar, and the money that we're spending is mandatory bar dues. So you don't pay these dues, you don't get to practice law, and you may not agree with us giving your money to somebody who's experiencing some sort of financial hardship. So we have not done that. I saw on one of these listservs that I was mentioning earlier, some bar providing advice to lawyers on how to apply for these PPP loans or, some of the federal loan programs that are available because of COVID. But we have never been involved in that kind of work.
Okay. Are there programs that people generally don't take advantage of?
I don't think people are aware of a lot of the programs that we offer. I mean, they're just even something as simple as the ethics helpline, where, if you've got a problem or a client who's bugging you about something and you're not comfortable with it because you think it's unethical or whatever, there's a lawyer from my office available every day during regular work hours to just sort of hash through it with you and figure out what you ought to do. Law practice management, same sort of thing. I think if you're running a law office, you need to be aware that they're there and that they have resources that would be helpful. I mean, I use them to help figure out what technology might be best used in my office, to figure out new ways of doing things. There's a fee arbitration program that if you've got a fee dispute with a client can arbitrate it in a way that sometimes can even preserve the relationship, although a lot of times the person's never going to hire you again anyway. But at least they can, without the expense of going to court, it's like what you do, Winter, where they can mediate the dispute and try to figure out whether the client in fact paid too much or didn't. And then we've talked about the wellness stuff and the lawyer assistance program to try to help people just deal with the stresses of being a lawyer and all of the pressure that can involve. So we offer a lot, and we're willing to even try to offer more. I mean, people approach us all the time about either new committees or new sections or new issues that we need to deal with. And the bar leadership is very receptive to that kind of thing.
That is amazing to hear. It is great to hear. And, as a lawyer, it is comforting to hear. A lot of bars do not respond that way.
Yeah.
So I think that's fantastic. And I think for me, as just a regular general member of the bar, I think it's incumbent upon me to help spread awareness about what the bar offers and how the bar can help you. I don't know if that comes from like my legal malpractice days where
maybe
I was like, let me tell you how not to screw this up.
Go to the bar and get some help.
Right. There are things you can do.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for being with me today. I really appreciate it. Like I said at the beginning, you are an inspiration to me. I mean, from your legal career to your work with the Lawyers Club of Atlanta, you just, anytime I can talk to you, I'm happy. But you're usually like swarmed by like 100 people, and I can't.
The Lawyers Club is one of my favorite places. So yeah,
exactly.
It's amazing.
So, this has been great. I got to have you all to myself for like an hour.
Well, it has been my pleasure.
You've been listening to The Future of Resolution, the podcast. You can follow the Future of Resolution on Miles Mediation and Arbitration's Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. If you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, and subscribe, rate, or review this podcast. Join us soon for another interesting discussion. Thank you for listening.